Chapter 7. Two pair. A pair of jacks and a pair of nines. The pot, 400 credits. The bet was to him, but Dickerson wasn't sure what to do. He rolled the vaporizer from one side of his mouth to the other. "Come on, Dickerson," Carbonaro said. Her ponytail bounced behind her neck as she laughed. "Don't be a civvy. Put the chips down or bounce." He blew out a sigh. The glint in her eye told him she didn't have shit for a hand, but she'd already managed to scare Elliot and Went out of it. Carbonaro had taken the last 3 hands without so much as a counter. Elliot and Went were down to a handful of chips. The game was really between him and Carbonaro. She knew it as well as he did. "Call," Dickerson said, and threw another 50 credits in the pot. He took a deep drag off the vaporizer and then blew a cloud of vapor over her head. Her nostrils twitched at the strawberry-scented cloud. The glint in her eyes faded. She knew she'd lost the moment he'd thrown in the chips. With a groan, she laid down a pair of aces, king high. Dickerson tossed his cards on the table, face up. Carbonaro cursed and swept the pot to him. "Asshole," she said. "That I am," Dickerson said, and began organizing his pile. He looked up at Went and Elliot. "You guys still in or what?" Elliot held out a hand, gesturing to Dickerson. Dickerson took another deep pull on the vaporizer and handed it to him. Elliot took a pull and blew the vapor in Carbonaro's face. "I'm done. I'm going to spend the next part of my paycheck on some goddamned X-ray." "S&R Black, this is Lieutenant Talby. You will assemble at 1600 Sol in our briefing room. That is all." Dickerson's head throbbed. The message had hit his block like a bomb, which, of course, was the intent. He didn't need to look at the rest of the table to know they'd received the same message. "Fuck me," Carbonaro said. She held out her hand to Elliot. He passed the lightweight cylinder to her. She took a drag, held it, and then let the vapor drizzle through her nose. "I just wanted to rip you guys off, get laid, and crash." "Amen to that," Went said. She passed the vape to him. A moment later, the disposable vaporizer was blinking. With a look of disgust, he placed it on the table. "At least we still have 45 minutes before we need to start a flush." "True," Dickerson said. He reached into the pack and pulled out another preloaded vape. He took a drag and passed it. The bio-nannies in his system were tearing apart the cannabidiol from the mild marijuana strain, converting it, adding it to amounts already stockpiled, and spreading them around for later use. They allowed a portion of the THC psychoactives into the bloodstream, but counteracted the rest. He knew what the little buggers were doing inside his brain. Marines took bio-nanny infusions once a week while on base and were required to use maintenance doses while on mission. When they were off duty, they were allowed to drink, smoke, and partake in however much THC they cared for. The nannies could clean intoxicants from their bloodstream in a matter of minutes, counteracting any deleterious effects before flushing the rest as waste through the kidneys. Goddamn Talby. Training mission in the morning, writing reports and summaries in the afternoon, and now he was fucking up their time off before another day of the same mind-numbing routine. Dickerson closed his eyes and leaned back in his chair. He was stoned. Every part of his being was at peace, except for that little voice inside his head that told him something was wrong. A briefing this late before chow, and after official leisure time had been granted? It didn't make sense. Talby was a bastard, sure, but he was also a good CO. He and the captain treated the Marines of S&R Black with respect and camaraderie. Gunny Cartwright was aces. So if they did have a real briefing at 1600, and it wasn't just a jerk-off, then, shit, he said aloud. "What's your problem, Dickerson?" He opened his eyes and locked them with Carbonaro's. "We have a mission." Swaying slightly from her own buzz, she smiled at him and slowly nodded. "You just now figured that out? Because I'm pretty sure the rest of us knew the moment the call came in." Dickerson felt embarrassed, but at the same time didn't care. She was right. If he hadn't been so damn stoned, he'd have figured it out too. Oh well. Want to knock boots later? Carbonaro shrugged. Only if we get a chance after the briefing. She took another hit off the vape and handed it to Elliot. Dickerson tapped a finger on the table's edge. If we're going on a mission, he said, you think we need to lighten up on Corporal Calimura? Wentz snorted out a stream of vapor and fell into a coughing fit. Are you kidding? He managed. Why the hell would we do that? Carbonaro asked. She's an arrogant bitch. The other lance corporals looked at him with mischief in their eyes. Elliot, Went, you've never been in the shit. He stared at Carbonaro. You have, Carb. If we're going on a real mission, we need to actually take her seriously, or someone could die out there. She opened her mouth to reply, and then closed it. For a moment, he wasn't sure if she would say anything. Instead, she shrugged. Yeah, okay, right. Went and Elliot exchanged glances, and then Went glared at Dickerson. Haven't been in the shit? What about Calimura? She's never been in the shit either. Dickerson leaned back in his chair. This conversation was killing his buzz. Either that or the bio-nannies had decided to go into overdrive. You ever talk to her, Went? Know where she's from? Her history? No, he said. And I don't care either. She's pretty much torched us non-rates the moment she got here. That's not an NCO, man. That's not someone who worked their way up the ranks. That's someone who got gifted a promotion. Right, Elliot said. How do you expect us to respect her if she has no respect for grunts? Dickerson leaned forward in his chair and put his elbows on the table. You ever look her up? Did you? Carbonaro asked. He nodded. She's from Mars. Schiaparelli. Marine brat? Went asked. Marine brat, Dickerson agreed. Father died in the shit, and she was right in the middle of it. Fuck, Elliot said. Man, if I'd been in that as a kid, I sure as shit would have become a miner instead. Shit, Dickerson, why didn't you tell me that a long time ago? Carbonaro asked. He rubbed his chin and absently played with the cards strewn across the tabletop. Didn't seem to matter. She's a green NCO. We always give them hell. And combat ZG training is supposed to be hell anyway. We try and wash them out. They try and find a way to survive. He picked up a suicide jack and tossed it. The card hit the table and slid across the surface to Carbonaro. Dickerson grinned. That's fun, and it's the routine. But if we're going on a mission, that shit needs to stop. Carbonaro took another hit. Okay, agreed. She passed it to Went. I'll let the others know. Besides, Dickerson said, his grin fading into a concerned frown, Talby and Gunny will absolutely eviscerate us if we pull that shit in the field. Went, Elliot, and Carbonaro laughed. A moment later, Dickerson joined them. He checked his block and realized he had 30 minutes to flush and prepare for the briefing. Okay, I'm going to go get pretty for the briefing. He stood from the table and arched his back. You should probably be doing the same. The three Marines still sitting groaned, flipped him the bird, and went back to the vape. Dickerson shook his head and headed to a flush station. At least he'd be relaxed at the briefing, which was more than he could say for Calimura. He imagined she'd be grinding her teeth through the entire meeting. Failure does that. Makes you remember your fuck-ups while you're staring another opportunity right in the face. He just hoped she could put today's exercise behind her long enough to succeed in the field. That's what really mattered. He hoped like hell she knew it too. Chapter 8. Talby stood at the front of the room and rubbed his eyes. He was tired. Between working with Cartwright the night before on training scenario ideas, the morning's disastrous training at the Dome, and the sudden need to put together a fake briefing, he was exhausted. Although Gunny would never admit it, he was sure Cartwright was just as run down as he was. The trick, of course, was to keep your fatigue hidden from the troops. It was one thing to crack a smile every now and then or get in their faces to correct a mistake, but to let them see you weak? That invited disrespect or, even worse, mistrust. Talby knew from experience that once you lost the trust of a unit, it was nearly impossible to get it back. His first cruise as a second lieutenant, he watched the captain flush out when the man failed to keep his cool during an assault near the Phobos mining station. After the battle had ended, it was clear he'd lost all the officers, not to mention the NCOs. He asked for a transfer, and it was immediately granted. Talby didn't plan on experiencing the same fate. He ran checks through his block and the holo terminal. They were in sync. When Captain Dunn arrived, they'd sync blocks, and everything would go great for the briefing. He hoped he'd done enough to make it sound like the captain had put together the briefing, and more importantly, that Dunn would be able to rattle it off as his own plan. That bit was important for the ruse to succeed. Not much of a ruse, he thought. The briefing would be pretty short and stupid simple. S&R Black had had too much rack time, and the brass wanted to send them out past Pluto for a little live training. That made sense to a certain extent. There were many dead satellites and other human-made junk out there to play with. Talby had even put together a scenario for boarding one of the sats, tethering it, and retrieving it into the S&R Black's cargo hold. He wasn't certain the captain would use that idea, but it could be entertaining. Fortunas had already forwarded him the logistics list the AI and Captain Dunn had come up with. Thus, he already had marching orders for everyone involved. Now, the only question was when to begin the loadout. According to the last stat report Lieutenant Noble submitted, S&R Black was 20 standard hours away from being ready. If, that was, they didn't run into any major snafus. While the Navy maintenance folks hadn't taken great care of their girl, Fortunas did. The AI was nothing if not efficient when it came to finding problems humans created and quickly devising a solution to fix them. In some ways, he wished Fortunas was their exclusive AI. Regardless, the ship would be ready if they could get her stocked and loaded in time for departure 20 hours from now. They'd make it. Colonel Hayes had told the other teams to drop everything they were working on that wasn't station critical to get S&R Black ready for work. Dunn had lobbied months ago to get an in-flight training regimen going for his people and the other S&R crews. Between budget concerns and the probability of injury or death, SF Gov had nixed the idea. Talby had helped the captain put together the proposal and was just as angry as Dunn that it hadn't been adopted. If it had, they wouldn't be busting their asses trying to get both the ship and her crew ready for a mission. Talby triple-checked the visuals, triple-checked the briefing notes with one of Fortunas' minor personalities, and finally stood still. He was done. There was nothing else to prepare, nothing else to check, nothing else to do but wait for the crew to file in. As if on cue, Cartwright stepped through the door. He was clean-shaven, dressed in a fresh jumpsuit, and glide-stepping to his place at the front of the room. "Gunny," Talby said. The man started to salute, but before Cartwright could raise his hand, Talby said, "At ease." Cartwright stood with his hands behind his back. "You ready for this, Gunny?" He might look fresh, but Talby could see the strain in his eyes. They'd both pored over so many holos, so many reports and maps over the last many hours, that neither man could see straight. Talby hoped his bio-nannies would take care of the problem shortly. "Ready, sir," Cartwright said. "Captain on his way?" Talby nodded. "I think he'll probably wait a few extra minutes for the troops to get their asses in here. We didn't exactly give them much time." "Bullshit," Cartwright said, and then caught himself. "Sorry, Lieutenant, Chuckling, Talby waved a hand. "We broke them out of leisure time. Knowing those reprobates, they were getting drunk or stoned or both. They'll all need nanny flushes." "Not all, sir," Cartwright said. "Callie Mira wasn't in the wreck area. I think she went back to work on the reports. Or maybe she went to Dome B. No telling." "Good," Talby said. "She might lose her job, but she's fighting for it." "Exactly, sir. A good sign." Through the open door, the two men heard the sounds of boots echoing off the grav plates and muted conversation. Talby crossed his arms and waited. He felt Cartwright tensing into attention almost at once. Unless he was alone with commissioned officers he knew or liked, he never dropped decorum. In front of non-rates and other NCOs, there was no possibility he'd do that. Now he looked more like a drill instructor ready to beat the shit out of any Marines that crossed him. 8 Marines filed into the room, one after another. Lance Corporal Dickerson led the group with Private Nero bringing up the rear. When they finished entering the room, the line stopped as one, turned on their heels to face the lieutenant, and saluted. "Well, about Yahweh damn time," Talby said. "At ease, Marines. Take a seat." The group broke apart, squad members sitting together. A moment later, Kalimura, Noble, Oakes, and Dunn walked in. Cartwright immediately barked, "Officer on deck!" The Marines stood and saluted. Dunn, with a look of exasperation on his face, said, "As you were," in a bemused voice. "Everybody take a seat." Once again, the Marines sat in their chairs. Kalimura sat with her squad. Talby noticed the spike in tension around that part of the room. He made a mental note to have a conversation with Cartwright and see how he wanted to handle it. They couldn't go into space on a real mission with dissension building amongst Kalimura's own squad. If they hit the shit with that going on, it could be dangerous, or downright deadly. S&R Black's pilot, Lieutenant Maurice Oakes, took a seat on the front row along with Second Lieutenant Noble. Since they didn't have any direct reports, it made sense for them to sit by themselves, although they did sit next to one another. The engineer and the pilot worked side by side since one flew and the other fixed. Despite the difference in rank, the two men had an easy relationship with one another, often dropping decorum, much to Gunny's chagrin. Talby sometimes wondered if the two men weren't occasional bunkmates. Talby and Cartwright remained standing by the holo display. Dunn looked chipper, but Talby could tell his commanding officer had had a long day. Although he and Cartwright had worked their asses off coming up with a half-believable training scenario to sell to the team, Dunn had been doing the real work with Portunus. "Someday that might be me," he thought to himself. Then again, being captain wasn't all it was cracked up to be. Dunn spent most of his time on logistics, the ship, and strategies. Talby and Cartwright merely had to implement them. And as far as action went, Dunn stayed on the ship. He tried to imagine a life without ZG combat, without commanding the troops in the field, let alone seeing the field, and being left behind when the action started. "Not for me," he thought. "Not for me." "Some of you might have guessed," Dunn said, "that we have a mission. You would be correct." Talby scanned the room, his eyes gauging the response of the Marines. The old squads, mainly filled with experienced lance corporals, looked happy, even excited. Kalimura, however, looked nonplussed. Not a good sign. "Before you get your hopes up, we're not going to be storming a pirate ship." Most of the Marines smiled, but said nothing. "Instead, we're traveling to the outer Kuiper belt near Pluto for ZG and deep space training. You're going to get lots of hours in the suits and have a number of tasks to complete." Dunn waved a hand and the holo display came to life. A picture of the belt appeared in the air, slowly rotating. A bright circle lit up near the blue sphere of Pluto, pulsed twice, and then the image zoomed in on the area. With a beautiful facsimile of Pluto rotating in the corner, a red dot appeared in the middle of the display. The captain pointed at it with his finger. "There are ancient pieces of space junk from all the probe missions sent during the latter days of the Common Era and the first century of the Sol Era." Dunn paused as he looked back at the Marines' faces. The non-rate's jaws had dropped. Dunn smiled. "Yeah, that stuff has been floating around for a very long time. Needless to say, it's all defunct and inoperable. But," he said and turned back to the display, "it will afford us the opportunity for live tether exercises, rescue scenarios, and a lot of ZG action." The Marines were silent. Talby gazed back at Kalimura as nonchalantly as he could. The young corporal looked relieved, but that flash of anger was still there. She really needed to learn to let go of her mistakes and move the fuck on. "The hell with Gunny," he thought. "I'll talk to her myself." "Now," Dunn said and shifted the display to a diagram of the S&R Black. "Tomorrow we'll begin a loadout. Lieutenant Talby has the assignments, and it will be all hands on deck. I want every piece of equipment going aboard tagged and accounted for. No screw-ups. We'll be traveling 19 AU, so there's going to be a significant amount of stasis time." Dunn paused for effect. Talby saw looks of both satisfaction and annoyance. The troops had probably thought this would be a near-post mission, or at least something within 5 AU. 19 AU was a long damned way, the same distance between Sol and Uranus. As far as he knew, only he, Dunn, and Cartwright had made trips of that distance in one hop. Before we enter stasis, you'll receive a much more pointed briefing and have time to study. This will be a very long journey, Marines, so make sure you don't leave anything behind you can't live without. The Marines said nothing, their eyes focused on him. Dunn nodded to himself. I want to stress this for you new people. Those of you that have been with this team for 2 or more tours know damn well what I'm about to say. This may be a training mission, but you need to approach it as if it were a real crisis. As I said, we'll be 19 AU from home, and there's no one out there to assist us if there's a problem. So do not take this lightly. Understood? Sir! Yes, sir! The Marines yelled as one. Good. Questions? Kelly Mora raised her hand. Corporal? She stood and cleared her throat. Sir, will we be formed in our regular squads? Dunn blinked and then glanced at Talby. Rolling his eyes, Talby stepped forward. Gunny and I will hand out the duty assignments. As far as you know, nothing will change from our normal training regimen. Does that answer the question? Aye, sir, she said, and returned to her seat. Any other questions? Dunn asked the room. Nothing but silence and the barely audible hum of the grav plates answered in return. Good. I expect you Marines to get some rest. The leisure light is lit for the rest of the evening, but tomorrow at Reveille, be prepared to work your asses off. Understood? Sir! Yes, sir! He nodded at them. Gunny, dismiss the troops. Aye, sir, Gunny said and stepped forward. S&R Black, on your feet! The seated Marines rose as one. Noble and Oakes, stay. The rest of you, dismissed! Hooah! Black! The line of Marines assembled by rank and filed out of the room. When the last of them disappeared through the doorway, Dunn waved a hand at the door. It closed automatically. The captain turned and faced the remaining crew. Let's everyone take a seat. Talby and Cartwright headed to a bank of chairs around a circular table at the back. The rest followed. Once Dunn sat down, he activated a holo display on the table. A diagram of S&R Black appeared along with lists of equipment, status messages, and maintenance logs. I know it's been a long afternoon, Dunn said, and everyone's probably exhausted. I'll keep this as short as I can. He gestured at Oakes. Lieutenant, where are we with navigation? Oakes waved a hand at the display and it immediately changed to show Neptune and the shipyards. Oakes, a large dark-skinned man with pigment blemishes on his arms and neck, pointed at the display. Sir, I've plotted 3 different courses depending on where you want to land in the Kuiper Belt. All 3 courses involve the same initial thrust out from Neptune to escape its gravity and get underway. A tiny shape labeled black appeared next to the shipyard's diagram and traveled in a straight line away from Neptune. It'll take us 2 standard hours to exit Neptune space before entering stasis. Once we go into stasis, he said, Black will head to Pluto. He waved in the air and the shape hurled itself toward the far edge of the holo. The display panned to follow the object, keeping it in the center of the image. Talby immediately saw why Oakes had chosen the course. The mining lanes for the inner Kuiper Belt were hardly used at the moment, but that didn't mean navigators could ignore it. S&R Black would travel well beyond the lanes, providing a known safe route. I've already taken the liberty of getting the colonel to send out an advisory to all mining ships to stay the hell out of our way. Talby grimaced. Like they'll listen, he thought. In the past 2 standard years, mining ships had had several near misses as well as 1 actual collision. Ironically, S&R Black had been the ship to save all the miners on the 2 vessels. Their parent company had been none too happy with the bill. Hopefully the smaller mine companies got the message. Oakes fast-forwarded the simulation until it displayed Pluto at the far edge. The ship slowed as it neared the icy image. The word ion cutoff appeared. We'll cut the ion drives here and then use Pluto to decelerate. That will put us less than 700 km from orbit. Once the ship's speed stabilizes, we'll come out of stasis here. A red mark appeared on the display. After that, we have 3 paths to choose from. What's the chances of us coming dangerously close to any Kuiper Belt objects? Talby asked the pilot. Oakes grinned. Pretty low. Black should be able to maneuver us around any unexpected objects or shatter storms in the area. If she can't, then she'll wake us up ahead of time or attempt to move them out of the way with tethers or projectiles. Dangerous, Dunn said. I'd rather not have Black create a shatterstorm by pulverizing a damned ice ball. Me neither, sir, Oakes said. But this is the Kuiper Belt. Black will communicate with Pluto Exo Observatory to get the best intel it can. If those folks on the station give her the right information, it shouldn't be a problem. Okay, Dunn said. Understood. Continue. Thank you, sir, Oakes said. He tapped the air in front of him and 3 paths appeared. One swirled around Pluto and then cannoned outward to a location well beyond the planet. This is the shortest path. We use Pluto to slingshot us around and give us enough thrust to reach the target area without touching our fuel reserves to gain speed. However, this does mean that if we don't have good intel, we could end up in exactly the situation we're trying to avoid. Kuiper Belt objects are unpredictable, especially with new KBOs entering the system. So while the known trajectories can be avoided, we can't really account for what's made it into the system since the last survey. Dunn nodded. Okay, next path. Path 2 is a straight shot through the middle belt to the outer. We leave Pluto's orbit using conventional thrusters, which will chew through a third of our reserves, but allow for much safer maneuvering. A third of our reserves? Dunn asked. That doesn't sound good. No, Oakes agreed. It's more fuel than I'd like, but keep in mind we can hit Pluto on the way home and fill up the tanks. Talby and Dunn exchanged a glance. He knew the captain was wondering if he should tell Oakes that they were going to be towing a goddamn humongous ship back to Neptune. Maurice, the captain said, how much more fuel would we need if we dragged something back to Pluto? The pilot looked confused, his eyes shifting from the captain to Talby and back. How large, sir? The captain sighed. He stared at each person in turn before speaking. This conversation stays here. In this room. If anyone blabs or tells tales out of school, then I'll know where the information came from. Understood? Aye, sir, the group said. May I? He said to Oakes, gesturing to the screen. Of course, sir. Dunn made a few hand gestures and the images of Pluto and the Kuiper Belt disappeared. Talby had no doubt the captain had connected to Portunas to pull images and data from their logistical conversations. Dunn was taking a risk here, but Talby realized without the proper information, Oakes and Noble couldn't possibly be prepared. A picture appeared on the screen. Both Oakes and Noble stared at it in confusion. This, Dunn said, is the Mira. The room was silent as a grave. She appeared a few days ago in the belt. He waved a finger and a list of specifications appeared. Tonnage, width, length, volume, presumed cargo, all appeared in a panel next to the 3D model of the giant ship. Part of our mission involves towing the ship back to Neptune, if possible. Oakes and Noble locked eyes. Noble said. Okay, so that would explain some of what Portunas was doing to Black. I'm sure it does, Oakes said. He looked back at the captain. Okay, so we'll need to refuel at PEO and refuel again before heading to Neptune, sir. Thought so, Dunn said. Noble held up a finger. But there is a problem, sir. What's that? Well, we'll be a hell of a lot slower towing that monstrosity. Might take us a while to travel back to Neptune. Pluto's gravity alone will cause problems. Oakes held up a finger. Not to mention, we'll have to stow the cargo in orbit while we refuel on the way back. Or we ditch it some part of the way to Neptune, return to Pluto to refuel, and hook back up to the... He paused, his eyes boring into the model. Sir, Are you sure it's the Mira? Dunn nodded. It is, Maurice. PEO confirmed it, and the codes check out. What the hell is she doing here, sir? Noble asked. Your guess is as good as mine, Lieutenant. Dunn smoothed the creases in his jumpsuit. She has no power that we know of and is drifting through the Kuiper Belt. Is she going to run into anything, sir? Oakes asked. Talby cleared his throat. If I may, sir. Dunn gestured for him to go on. Talby tinted his hands. Look, I know this is a shock to say the least, but it doesn't matter how she got here or why she's here. We won't know that until we reach her. The only important part of this meeting is for you two to tell us what's possible and what's not. If we've been given an impossible mission, then let's make it possible. Otherwise, let's just come up with the best plan. Well stated, Dunn said. He turned his gaze back to the engineer and the pilot. They both looked paler than they had before. So, how much time do you need to figure it out? Oakes bit his lip and then rubbed his shaved scalp, the hard stubble whispering against the flesh of his palm. He thought for a moment while tapping his fingers on the table. His eyes flicked up and down Mira's specifications. Noble studied them too. After a full minute of suffocating silence, Oakes grinned. He nodded to himself. We can do this, sir. Noble shrugged. Lieutenant Oakes is correct, sir. We can do this. I have a feeling Portunas has already figured out the best way to go, but I'll ping him as soon as the meeting is over. Just means that Lieutenant Oakes will need to replot his courses. Why do I bother? The pilot chuckled. I'm sure Portunas has it all laid out. Remind me again why I have a job? Dunn smiled. Because AIs are expensive and meatbags aren't. Oh, right. Forgot about that, Oakes said, his white teeth glowing in spite of the overhead lights. Besides, the captain said, you'd be out of a job. Now, tell me how we're going to do this. The 5 men conferenced in Portunas and took another hour to come up with navigation scenarios as well as fuel scenarios. In the end, they chose the option of refueling at Pluto before heading for Mira and refueling afterward. The quote-unquote afterward part was the most troublesome. Assuming they could tow Mira, something that might be completely out of the question after an inspection, getting past Pluto's gravity on the same trajectory they used to get to the outer Kuiper Belt would be problematic. But considering they had to refuel at Pluto regardless, they had to find a way to make it happen. Portunas rated their success forecast at 75%. Not the kind of odds Talby wanted to hear, but a 3 in 4 chance was better than no chance at all. By the time Dunn called an end to the meeting, Talby felt as though he'd been up all night. A look around the table told him the others felt the same. Get some R&R, the captain said as he stood. The command crew stood as well. But Reveille is going to be early, and we have a lot of work to do. So, try not to have too much fun. Now get out of here. The men saluted. Aye, sir. Dunn nodded to them and headed out of the room. Talby looked at the men. You have your orders. Let's make sure this goes as smoothly as possible. It's going to be a long trip and we can't afford to leave anything behind or miss any details. Dismissed. The crew filed out of the room by rank. Talby and Oakes leading the way with Noble and Cartwright just behind them. When they reached the personnel deck, they broke up and headed in different directions, except for Oakes and Noble. Talby wanted to get drunk. He wanted to get stoned. But what he wanted more than anything was 4 hours of rack time before he resumed planning the recon of Mira. If enough of her was intact, it could take them more than half a day, with 4 squads, to scour every inch of her looking for data, survivors, and why humanity's beacon of hope had failed.